Welcome, everybody. I'll just do a brief introduction for you and we'll get on with the day's events. So first and foremost, welcome back to Melbourne Angels at Noon. This is our first one for 2021. It's a new year, it's a new decade, and I think it's a new era. I think in so many ways we can see that things are going to be very different in the next 10 years and beyond. We can look at what's happening in space. We're going back to the moon, we're going to Mars. Obviously, there's all of the impact of the pandemic and how that's permanently shifted the way we live. The final and necessary landslide shift in the United States of political leadership. Hopefully we can see the world be more positively impacted from that. There's a whole lot of big picture things. And of course, around what we're going to hear about today, there are major technology trends, such as artificial intelligence and blockchain, and new technologies for batteries that will allow us to have higher density, drive the adoption of electronic vehicles. Electric airplanes are coming along, electric boats. There's an enormous shift going on, and there's a lot of opportunity in that for those of us who are in the game of innovation, and in particular trying to promote disruptive and constructive change in the world. And that's who Melbourne Angels are. So we couldn't do what we do at Melbourne Angels without the support of the organisations who give us assistance, host us, and deliver services to us on a pro bono basis. So we always need to thank those and to recognise the value that they help us create for the whole community. It's probably worth letting you know a little bit about Melbourne Angels. So the first thing to understand is that Melbourne Angels is a collaborative collective of private individuals. We're not a business, we're a non-profit or volunteer activity. And our goal is to work together to invest in high growth startups that can deliver a significant change for the better in the whole world. And we do that by typically making in the order of 20 investments a year. That totals usually in the order of about $3 million. There's more than 90 members in the group at the moment. We have a portfolio of companies that in excess of 75, and we do all of this by having pitch meetings at least once, but usually twice a month, both when we can, back in in-person mode, but also in virtual mode. Then we have a number of other activities like the one you're with us today for Angels at Noon, which are open to the whole community. Now, in doing all of that over the last nearly 14 years, we've made in excess of 600 individual investments for a total of a little over $30 million of our money that's gone into those companies. And that's leveraged 6 times as much money from other investors into those same companies. So one of the things that measures the impact of what we do and that we are very proud of is that's funded the creation and sustainment of in excess of 600 new high-value jobs. And of course, we've had a number of exits, good exits and bad exits, but we've had 10 exits out of that portfolio, which is a pretty good ratio. Only one of those has been an ASX listing. Now, why would you be an angel investor and why would you be doing it in Melbourne? Well, just some perspective to offer. People these days are very focused on unicorns. It's worth understanding. Australia performs quite well in this sector, but out of the unicorns that we have, the majority of them have been backed by angels in the beginning, and the majority of them were founded here in Melbourne. And at least 6 of them dominate their industry segment globally. So those are great companies to be involved with. Now, when we look at it at the other end of the equation, how do we see our returns? It's usually through a trade sale exit. And in recent years, for all of the trade sale exits that have been in excess of $5 million in value, around 70% of those were backed by angel investors. Around 48% were founded right here in Melbourne, so just under half in one city for the whole country. And 85% of those successful exits had no venture capital investment, which is why 90% of the biggest returns to founders and to the early investors came in deals that had no VC investment. So it's just important to understand that this is a parallel path, multifaceted investment landscape, and the road to success for startups can follow many different paths. And then just a little bit about our portfolio. On the left here, you can see a number of the companies that we've exited from. They cover a wide range. They cover online software to support the travel industry. Table was for booking tables. Gen3 Media was a digital marketing company. Blue Chip is a semiconductor and technology company. Hovercraft, power for the third world, medical device companies, all sorts of women's health companies, a whole range. And then, of course, what you can see, and this is by no means the whole portfolio, is a wide range of other companies, again, covering a diverse range of sectors in the community. So we're very proud, and we typically not only invest in these companies once, but for those that are succeeding, it's not uncommon that we support our companies through 2, 3, 4, even 5 rounds of investment. So we'd certainly encourage you to become an angel, to join Melbourne Angels. You get a strong return on involvement when you join angel investing. And at Melbourne Angels, our investments certainly do offer more than financial returns because we're focusing on more than financial input. So let me just move on then to today's speaker. I'd like to introduce Dr. Catriona Wallace. Catriona is the CEO of Ethical AI Advisory and the director of Boab AI. Sorry about that. Catriona founded Flamingo AI, an artificial intelligence software company based in both the US and Australia. And in 2018, the Australian Financial Review recognized Catriona as the most influential woman in business and entrepreneurship. She sits on a number of boards, including the Board of Responsible Technology Australia, and is an adjunct professor and was once a police officer and a nightclub owner. So Catriona has led a very interesting life. She's had a lot of experience in very different ways. Today, she's going to talk to us about the ethical artificial intelligence for investors. So looking at the issues around artificial intelligence and the ethics involved from our perspective. And I'd in particular like to thank Andrew Miles and the Melbourne Angels Special Interest Group for AI, who have brought Catriona to us today. So with that, all I'd like to do is remind you all that we do this every month of the year except for December, and the next Angels at Noon will be on March the 26th. You're more than welcome, and we encourage you to book through Eventbrite and come back and enjoy this session. So that said, with no further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Catriona so that we can enjoy what she has had to share with us today. Catriona, it's all over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jordan, for that very warm welcome, and it is a delight to be with you all today. And because we are formally meeting, it's important for me to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm sitting on today, which is Sydney. So I wanted to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I know a lot of you are in Melbourne, so to the Wurundjeri people. And to those of you who are in other places in the country, also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that you are on. And given that our First Nations people have been innovating for 80,000 years, we as a country should be pretty good at that, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, a particular innovation, which is artificial intelligence. So let me just jump in and share my screen, and I'm going to have a few slides here. Some of them we may talk about, some of them we may not, but what I would love to do is have this be pretty interactive. So my intention is to talk a little bit about AI investment, to talk about AI itself, and then responsible tech and ethical tech, and why I absolutely encourage all of you to think about learning, if you don't already know, about how to think through an ethical lens when you're assessing technologies which are incredibly powerful but also incredibly dangerous, like artificial intelligence. And as we go through, feel free to drop questions that you might have in the chat pane, or if you want to just raise your hand and perhaps Jordan or Duncan can moderate some questions. Otherwise, I'll talk for about 20 minutes and then we'll have plenty of time to chat after that. So let me just introduce myself a little bit further. Jordan mentioned a few things that I do, but primary role.
Excuse me, Catriona.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but there seems to be something on your screen obscuring your display. Do you have you shared just the window rather than the screen?
Let's have a look at that. Let me. Okay, see if
From
better?
from our end, it's a grey rectangle on the right-hand side of the screen.
Okay, no. Let's go again with this. Okay, just see if this one will work. Got anything there?
It's changed colour. It's now black.
Okay, let's try one more time. Otherwise, I'm totally capable of doing this without any need for slides at all. So let's see. Okay, can you see anything there?
Yes.
I think the same. So I think if you want, you can send this back to one of us and we will present.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's just have a chat then. Happy if that's not.
Well, go ahead and use the slides, so we can see most of the slide. It'll work.
No, hey, I'm really cool just to do this.
Okay.
Obviously, as a living, so very happy just to have this as interactive chat. So let me start by further introducing myself. So I'm the executive chair of Boab AI. So some of you who have been following the news, particularly last week, will know that Boab AI is Artesian Capital's AI accelerator company. So we were launched in July last year, 2020, and we are in fact a Victorian-based fund, and we are in partnership at the moment with LaunchVic. So LaunchVic have put in about $1.5 million. Artesian Capital has put in $8.5 million to do an initial $10 million fund. And our mandate is to fund 32 scale-up artificial intelligence companies. And what that means is they need to have product, some customer, some traction, and a revenue somewhere at least $500,000 annual recurring revenue. And so last week we announced our first 5 investments into 5 young companies. So that was Pi Exchange, Datum, Remy AI, Strongroom AI, and Platos. And we wrap a program around these companies to help them scale, because as someone who has scaled an AI company, it's actually particularly difficult to do so because of the complexity of the machines that we build. So my background is, and I'll talk a bit more about BOA, but just so the context of my background. So I am an entrepreneur. I've built numerous companies, a market research company called ACA Research, a human-centered design, customer experience design firm called Fifth Quadrant. I set up the first women co-working space in Australia called Ventura and sold that. And then I built Flamingo AI. So we were one of the first AI startups in Australia. So that was founded around 2014. I spent about 6 months in the Australian market at the time when venture capital was around $20 million altogether in the market, and very little of that going to AI because it wasn't really a thing, and certainly very little of that going to women-led businesses. So I took the business to the US and set up in New York, and then operated the business out of New York and Sydney. And essentially what we provided was a machine learning brain that acted as a subject matter expert that enterprises use. So for example, HSBC is one of our big clients, and they call the software robot that we built Tron, and Tron is used to augment or replace human subject matter experts. So the people that everyone goes to ask them about policy or pricing or product, now instead of going to a human, they can go to this essentially software robot. And so what the robot can do is it gets trained, it learns. So the HSBC robot now knows about 40 of the banking products and processes. And if it doesn't know an answer to a question an employee has, then it can facilitate a communication and collaboration between humans, get the answer, go through an approval process, and give the answer to the employee who asked. So we see this as an example of machine learning based technology. So our company built our own ML machine learning technology, because there wasn't things off the shelf that you could buy back in the day or open source too much. So we built it ourselves, and it's now patented in the US and in Australia. So I brought that back on shore in 2016 and listed it on the Australian Stock Exchange or Securities Exchange. We were one of the first AI companies on the exchange. We were one of the first startups. And I have to say it was a brutal journey. Some of you who have experience in the capital markets knows that it is not the right place for a young American-based emerging tech company. And so last year we exited Flamingo, the business, out of the listed company, and it's now in very good private hands. Some American and Australian investors who have taken it and are now running it very effectively back in private hands. And we're now in the listed company looking at our next acquisition into that shell. So I have been on, as I say, to the gates of entrepreneurial hell and back many times in building one of Australia's first AI companies. So I know how hard it is. Hence, I'm very well positioned to be supporting investors such as Boab and Artesian and yourselves think about what is a good AI investment and what might not be. But let's and so other things about myself. So I am, Jordan mentioned, an adjunct professor. So I did my PhD at the Australian Graduate School of Management. There, my expertise is the role, excuse me, computer technology plays in replacing human leaders. So I've been studying, writing, and researching technology really replacing humans for 20 years. It sounded like science fiction back in the day, but it's actually legitimately a thing. We know that in the next 3 years, 40% of all admin and service sales jobs within financial services, telco, potentially government, hospitality, retail, tourism will be replaced by machines such as Flamingo has or other AI providers. So entry-level jobs will be done within the next 3 years, 40% of them by machines and artificial intelligence. And if we think about what AI is, the most simplest way to describe it is that it is software that mimics human intelligence. It's been around since 1950, so it's actually mature in the sense that it is 70 odd years old, but it's only been in the last 5 years that we've had the computational power, the big data, the data scientists that can pull it all together to actually get AI to scale. It is now the fastest growing technology sector in the world. There is $35 billion invested into it last year. We expect that within the next 4 years to be up to around $270 billion invested in it. So it's will be on a hockey stick. We've seen in the last 5 months, thanks to COVID, about 5 years worth of technology advancement has come into the AI sector. So COVID has actually been very, very good for artificial intelligence. An example with the Flamingo product was a number of our clients approached us to say, because we've got at-home workers who don't have access to our systems, or they've got to go through security walls, they can't get access to people or systems on premises. So we need something in the cloud to give them support or to answer questions. So we're now looking at rolling the Flamingo product out across 19 countries with one particular client in order to support their at-home workers. So, and then you'll start seeing that all of the technologies that we're using, such as this one, Zoom, the foundational components of it will start to be machine learning or artificial intelligence based. And Gartner predicts really within the next 3 years that 75% of all technologies will have AI as its foundational component. And so we think of AI as really a horizontal. It is a power source. And if you think about the big thinkers in the AI field, so the head of Google describes AI as being the most powerful thing that's come beyond what the internet was. So we talk about the internet being the communications revolution, or then the coming of AI is the computational revolution. And the head of Google describes it as being more significant than when fire was invented, and the head of Baidu, which is a very, very large Chinese AI provider, describes AI as more significant than when electricity was introduced into the industrial era. And without question, I believe exactly the same thing. Australia, however, is way, 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 way behind. So if we look at the per capita investment into artificial intelligence for the US market, it is around $19 per capita. In the Australian market, it's around $2 per capita. We saw the current government and Prime Minister Scott Morrison last October did an address and was published, and then I did a LinkedIn post which then went crazy viral, with the Prime Minister saying that Australia was not to be the next Silicon Valley, was not a country of tech heads. We were going to be good at being tech adopters rather than tech creators or tech inventors, which is like just nuts. And so just so you know, I have actually written a letter to the Prime Minister just suggesting that we perhaps, the technology community, misunderstood or he may have not projected exactly what he thought, because surely this couldn't be true. And we're just waiting on a response to that. So with a government politicians that don't really understand artificial intelligence, we are quite a way behind. So the delightful thing at Boab, I mentioned that we have a $10 million fund. We've just announced last week that we are launching a global AI fund called the Boab Global AI Fund, which is a $100 million fund. And we're just looking to raise investment into that fund currently. So if any of you are interested in speaking to me or any of the team at Boab or Artesian, please let me know. This is a very, very exciting fund. We will look to invest in 150 AI companies in Australia or globally over the next 5 years. So we will really lead the way in Australia in doing this AI investment. So one of the things that I learned about in the US market, in the Australian market, is that artificial intelligence essentially is not controlled. There are very few laws, there are very few regulations that dictate anything that the AI can do. There are certainly domain laws and regulations. So if you're in financial services, as we at Flamingo was, then we need to abide by those domain rules, but there's nothing really that determines how me as an AI developer or vendor builds the technology. And there's nothing that really dictates what the user or the deployer of the technology, so in our case, enterprise clients, use it for. So we would say the law and regulation is about 5 years behind where we, the entrepreneurs, are. And I work very closely with Minister Karen Andrews, who is the Federal Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. And we released about 18 months ago Australia's first ethical AI guidelines, which I'm going to take you through in a minute, plus Australia's AI roadmap. But these are guidelines. They're not rules, they're not laws, they're not regulations. And what we know is there are, the big thinkers, the big philosophers, the big providers of AI, even like Elon Musk. He describes AI as inviting AI into the world is the same as summoning the demon or the devil. So inviting AI into the world is like summoning the devil. Stephen Hawking said, how can you possibly control something you don't understand? And so when we think about how far AI has progressed already, only a few months ago, Elon Musk did his big first show of his minimal viable product of the neural link. So the neural link is a non-biological brain that sits outside the human brain and with very thin wires is chipped into the brain. So what we project based on technologies like Neuralink is that by 2029, having non-biological brains that sit outside the human brain and really ramp up its computational power will be not necessarily a common thing, but readily available. And so what they're projecting there is that the ability to think faster, to take brain waves and images from the brain and put it into a computer. All of those things will be able to happen within 10 years. Within 25 years, we predict the time of singularity, which is the time when the machines no longer need their human masters. In fact, they have learned to code themselves, which they do now. Machine learning essentially means that the machine can learn on its own without any necessary human intervention and become smarter at what it does. By in 25 years, by say mid-2040s, we expect that time of singularity to have arrived, where the machines no longer need their human masters. Now, the biggest countries in the world in producing AI would be, number one is China, number two is India, and then followed closely by the US. So it's, you know, we tend to think about the American market as being the leaders in this field, but it's actually the Chinese. And the Chinese have state backing and they have scale, but what they don't have is societal debate on the pros and cons of AI. And that's what makes China such an exciting country, but also with due caution in the power that this can create. So we know the military already produces AI killing machines. So there are robots that are designed as weapons. There are what called slaughter bots. So they're little drones that fly and just essentially fly into people and kill them. We know that the Americans used a drone to kill, I don't recall his name, but the Iranian military high-level guy at the end of last year. That was, you know, big news. That was a drone AI-based assassination. So on a worrying field is the power of AI in military and weaponry and warfare. And so we kind of think 50% of this is all going to go really well, and we're going to have amazing, amazing examples of AI, particularly in healthcare. So we will, and already seeing AI-based robots used for children with autism. We're seeing doctors using robotics to conduct operations on the other side of the world. We're seeing diagnosis. There's a fabulous company in Australia actually looking for investment now called, the product is Life Whisperer, and the company is Presagen, Presagen. And this is for embryo selection in IVF. And so to choose which embryo is most likely going to be the best one. And then the next product they've coming is using that embryo and diagnosing what genetic defect may be in it. Extraordinary Australian invention. But again, interestingly, struggling to get a lead investor on their Series A round now. So we will see amazing things in healthcare. We'll see fabulous things in financial services. But because there is no rules or regulations, who's leading this? And did many of you see The Social Dilemma, the film The Social Dilemma? You just put your hand up if you saw the film Social Dilemma. If you haven't and you have Netflix, I absolutely thoroughly encourage you to watch it. It's a great deep dive into the tech giants. So essentially what we see with the tech giants is that, say, the 5 big tech giants, you know, including Google, Facebook, Amazon, interestingly enough, Twitter would be in there, and then you've probably got IBM, Microsoft hanging on the side of that. Of those 5 tech giants, there would be 50 designers that currently control the attention of 2 to 3 billion people on a given day. And so we're seeing not only danger in what AI can build, but danger because AI, the power of AI is being concentrated into these large tech giants who, when we look at what the models of ethical and responsible technology are, don't line up with their models. And so what we say about companies like Facebook and Twitter and Google is, for us, we the customers, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. And that's what we're seeing now with governments coming head to head with Facebook and the Australian government about news feeds. And you can see Facebook does what it wants, then it's back into negotiation. Google is making a lot more effort to be an ethical company. But if we think about their business models, and even when I think about business models of clients I have who are financial services companies, where is the incentive to be ethical when the typical model of business is to build product, ship it fast, get ahead of competitors, be efficient and make faster decisions? To do that and do that quickly may not give you enough time to think about ethics. So let me just hold there and see if there's any questions you have, and then I'm going to kind of talk about what responsible tech and ethical tech is.
Fantastic startup, Catherine. So it is really making us think, especially me. I live in big AI every day. But I wanted to expand on your last point, which is fantastic, which is if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. I believe that's a very interesting comment, and I thought it would be interesting to expand a little bit more on that, so rest of my colleagues can also appreciate as I appreciate.
Great question. Okay, so let's think about this. So a classic one would be in Instagram. So Instagram, there's no subscription for that. Twitter, no subscription. You don't pay anything for Facebook. But what you do give over is your data. And so then what these companies do is they use the data in order to sell to advertisers to then target advertisements and sales essentially. But it might not just be selling a product, it might be selling a political campaign. And that was what we saw in the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook scandal, was that Cambridge Analytica, a client of Facebook, did a false, misleading little survey, personality survey, that lots of people would have just gone on to do for fun. Oh, what's my personality type? They took that data and then used algorithms to bombard people with propaganda around which way they were going to vote. And so we see that in advertising. We see that with young people, so young girls, about how they're meant to look. We see it with young boys around access to pornography. We see it with people access to gambling. And where these big companies get their revenue from is from the advertisers who are paying them to use our data as products. And so this is terribly, terribly dangerous. And where it becomes more tricky is if we think about AI, the way I think about it is got sort of 4 or 5 components. So it's got the data, which is used to train the algorithms, which then goes into analysis and decision making. And then there's an action or an automation. So let's go there again. Data, algorithms, analysis / decision making, and then into automation. So I'll give you an example of where this has gone badly, and some of you would have read about this in the last 12 months. So Apple released their Apple Card last year, and they did it in partnership with Goldman Sachs. So what Goldman Sachs did is they got an AI, got some algorithms, went and got some historical data, trained the algorithms to determine the an automated credit limit that they would give to the customers. So Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, said, okay, Apple Card, cool, I'll put my details and my wife's details in, which are exactly the same because we're from the same household, and she can get a card and I can get a card. Anyway, it came back and Steve was given 10 times the credit limit of his wife, Mrs. Wozniak. There was a very high-profile IT developer in Europe who did a post, and this went viral. He did his, and his wife did hers, exactly the same financial details, but she got 20 times less credit than what he did. So this just went nuts and went viral. And everyone, we the AI commentators said, okay, what went wrong here? And what went wrong is, as it does in every day, in so many AI applications, is companies use historical data to train the algorithms that are going to make the decisions of the future. So Goldman Sachs would have gone to some data company and said, okay, give us 10 years of historical financial data. And we already know that, ladies who are on the call with us, that in a lot of cases, we, the women, will have been left out of that data, or we would not have been given the same credit limits previously because we're women. Same would possibly occur to people in minority groups, to people with disabilities. And so if we're using historical data to train the algorithms that are going to automate our future, we're screwed, because what we're going to do is just hard code at scale all of the problems that we've already faced in society. And we're seeing examples of this over and over and over again. So there is another AI called Compass, C-O-M-P-A-S, very famous use case or case study of an AI that's used by judges in courts in American states. And what the AI does when a person comes before them who's about to be sentenced, the AI gives the judge a score for that person based just on their characteristics. So it'll be their age, their race, their previous history, and it gives them a score, and the judge uses that score to determine the length of sentence. And because it's a recidivism score, recidivism meaning the likelihood that this person will reoffend and go back to jail. Anyway, of course, what happened is it ended up being hugely biased against African-American men. And so if you were a man of color and came before the court, the algorithm would give you a much higher recidivism rate and you would get a much longer sentence. So that's been hugely scandalous. There was another example of Amazon itself, right? Amazon used an AI recruitment app to analyze resumes and then recommend people into Amazon as recruits and employees. What it learned, and so Amazon took their previous history of successful employees, used that as the training data, and what the algorithms learned was that anyone that had the word woman in their CV would immediately be removed because it was traditionally males who'd been successful as employees in Amazon. And so again, the historical data chucked out all the women, and that blew up all over the media, and Amazon, one of the biggest providers of this technology in the world, got it wrong, so wrong. And so these are examples, and we've got more healthcare examples. Optum, a big American healthcare provider, ended up having allocating where healthcare treatment would go, and prioritize upper class white people and deprioritize lower class people of color. And I can just go example. And actually on my website, which is ethicalai.ai, which is the consulting practice I have around ethical AI, we've got a whole blog called Bad Robots, and I've just got example of this in there. So this is where all of this goes wrong and is already kind of the train's left the station. So even when you just Google basic things, like I do a little exercise with people I'm talking to Google professional hairstyles. So I can invite you to do this now, right? So if you get your phones out and Google professional hairstyles and then hit images, just see what comes up. If you Google best CEOs, hit images, see what come up. Most intelligent people in the world, hit images, see what comes up. What will happen is when you do, or even professor style, right? So I'm a professor, you hit professor style and Google it, what will come up is a very usually young, quite good looking white man in a tweed suit, which does not represent me. When you do unprofessional hairstyles will come up with women of color with cornrow hairstyles. When you do best CEOs in the world, it'll be predominantly older white males. Most intelligent people, older white males. So this bias is already in the AI companies, and this is what our children are learning from. And so back to the question about if you are not if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. what we're really calling for, and I sit on a board called Reset Australia. So Reset Australia is funded by Luminate, which is a social venture out of the US, founded by the founder of eBay. So he has funded Reset Australia, Reset UK, Reset US, all these resets as a not-for-profit. And our role is to work with governments, politicians to change policy. And our view is that these big tech, AI-based tech giants must move into subscription models. They must move away from no pay, and then the customer and the data becomes the product, into actually subscription models. So we don't know where this will go. We can see there's agitation already, but my key point here is that these are the tech giants and the government fighting it out, but nobody's winning. Nobody's winning. So we don't have a clear leader through this ethical conundrum that we're in. So what I'm saying in all of my talks to investors is, let's give you a lens to look at so that you can be doing the right thing and investing in companies that are starting to know and learn and building their tech ethically. And even if they haven't got it yet, you as an investor should hold the board and the company to some standards. And I'm going to talk you through those standards now. So
Kat, sorry to interrupt. We've still got 3-4 quick questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to answer those now for the content that you've covered, or do you want to keep them to the end?
No, we can go now for sure.
Okay, the next one in order of raising hand was actually Jordan.
Thank you, Duncan. And actually, it's quite pertinent to what you're discussing just now, Catriona. So the problems you've described are quite well known to anyone who's been following AI in the last 30 or 40 years. But one of the things that's happening at the moment, I guess, is, and that we're interested in when we're looking forward as investors, is what are the actual technologies? And I was just wondering if you could give a short response to the questions around whether or not you think explainable AI is actually going to be a practical solution, because there's a lot of concern that it just actually further clouds the issue. And then the next step beyond that, of course, is how do we actually establish transparency and the trade-off there between the complexity of things like multi-layered neural networks and, of course, the proprietary interest of people who develop clever technology. So I wonder if you could just address those sort of attempts to do what you were talking about, which is create ethical AI.
Perfect segue. Thanks, Jordan. Great question. Okay, so let's look at the types of AI that there is, and then I'll get into what are the 8 principles of ethical AI that would then allow for that sort of transparency you're talking about. So we talk about AI being, so the types of it are machine learning and deep learning. So AI could actually just be anything that mimics human intelligence, that is automated but doesn't have machine learning, the ability to learn on its own. So first thing as investors is really dig into what is, if they're claiming it's AI, actually see if it's machine learning, because what we really want to be investing in, I believe, is machine learning based platforms. So and deep learning and neural networks, etc. So there's machine learning, deep learning, neural networks that's type of AI. Then there is computer vision technology. So it is like facial recognition. Then there's NLP, or natural language processing, which is what my company does. It's where the machines learn to essentially speak human language and can understand human language. And the way to think about that is our brain was a 300-dimensional graph that understood the intention of human language, and it took the words, put them into numbers, shone them into the graph. The graph would then mathematically associate them with an answer, would take the numbers, turn them back into letters, turn them back into sentences, and then out they come as natural language. So quite phenomenal, as you can see. Then we have data science, and big data is a type of a field in AI. And then there is robotics and sensors. And then there's robotic process automation. So we go through them, it would be machine learning, deep learning, computer vision technology, natural language processing, robotics and sensors, and robotic program automation, process automation would be the 5 types. Now, when we think about the ethical principles of those type of technologies, this is how we think. And this is pretty much shared universally. And I have a presentation that I was going to show you that I can send you later to share with everyone. So the first principle in ethical AI is this, that the AI must be built with human, society, and environment benefit in mind. It must not come at a cost to human, society, and environment. There must be benefit. Second principle is it must be built with human-centered values in mind. So the AI must be built with human-centered values in mind. Now, quick side note to that is, are my human values the same as Hugo's human values, the same as Alexander's human values, the same as someone in Thailand's human values? Big question around that, right? But that's the principle. Third one is that the AI must be fair. It must not discriminate. The fourth one is that AI must adhere to privacy and security requirements. Fifth is that the AI must be reliable and safe. And the 6th, 7th, and 8th are super interesting, right? So the 6th one is contestability. So contestability means that if we were an organization and we had adopted these ethical principles and we had a contestability principle in place, what that means is, and if Mrs. Wozniak was our customer, Mrs. Wozniak had the right to contest the decision that the AI made because she thinks it's discriminatory. So we would have to have a contestability process in our business for Mrs. Wozniak and potentially the entire class action that might come with all the other Mrs. Wozniaks who've been discriminated against, and deal with that. So contestability is the 6th principle. The 7th principle, Jordan speaks to your point about explainability, is the AI must be transparent and explainable. So it must be transparent and explainable. Now, those of you who have ever dug around AI know that that is pretty hard to do, because AI that's being built traditionally is what we call black box AI, and it's enormously difficult, even for the data scientists who programmed it, to understand what it's done, because if it's machine learning, it's learned and it's identified other patterns and it's taught itself other things. To go back and understand, well, here's the original algorithm, no longer works. So for it to be transparent, even to open the box and show inside, difficult to do. To be explainable, super difficult to do. So we now talk about explainable AI or white box AI, and this would be something that you really would want to be looking at with a company that you're investing in, that they have explainable and white box AI. Flamingo are white box AI. We can literally open it up, show how the decisions are made, even not even a data science to look at, even just a non-technical person could look in it and see how it went on. So that's the 7th principle, transparency and explainability. And the 8th principle is accountability. So if Mrs. Wozniak was discriminated against, it was unfair, she's contested it, she's come in, we've showed her inside the box, we've explained to her why the decision was made. If we decide that that has been wrongly made, then we, the organization, so Wells Fargo and Apple, must be held accountable. But not only that, the vendor who sold the AI to, whose AI it is also held accountable. So when I do these talks to big operations and tech companies, they get very, very worried about this, because that's a massive thing to do, right? To have all those processes, if your AI has made a decision, is a real challenge operationally to do. So again, they are the 8 principles that are almost universally regarded. And for good companies and for companies that you're looking to invest in, that are actually probably not even just AI companies, right? This could be kind of more broader with tech. These are the principles we want them to be able to adhere to. So I have a consulting business called Ethical AI Advisory, helping businesses think through this. And we partner with another very cool group called the Gradient Institute. So the Gradient Institute are our partners in training the engineers how to do ethical coding, which is a thing. So what we'll do at Boab is we'll make sure all our portfolio companies are trained in the ethics or all of those processes and principles, and then get them trained in doing ethical coding as well. Because, and why is this, right? Let's think about it. Let's be really pragmatic. Because even though government and tech giants are off doing their own thing, government trying to catch up, eventually it's going to catch up. And those companies that have built their technology ethically and responsibly will be the ones that are not the ones getting in trouble, will be the ones that don't have this massive risk exposure. And so that, I think, is a practical business and investment decision. But beyond that, it's just the right thing to do.
Okay. Peter Chenoweth, did you still have your question? And you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks very much, Duncan. Fascinating presentation, Catriona. Your definition of the singularity being the mid-2040s, could you briefly explain to us your definition? And by way of context, you've probably read Toby Walsh's 2062 and that consensus forecast for the forecast equivalence of the sum of AGI systems at the time with human intelligence being 2062. So in your definition, you've advanced this nearly 20 years, which I find rather troubling. So what's your definition of singularity?
Yeah, so look, there's a lot of different debate about when this time is, and of course I know Toby extremely well. Most of the thinkers, and particularly most of the thinking coming out of the US AI philosophers, still put it around those 2040. And for us, singularity would be literally the time that the machines no longer need their human masters, so they're able to learn, program themselves. Now, that can happen now. It just doesn't happen at scale. So where Toby's probably thinking in another 20 years beyond that would be full dystopian, because I know Toby's he's also pretty dark on where all this is going to go, where it's probably by that stage quantum computing and AI has come together and they've got this on another scale altogether. That's when it will be extremely dark beyond anything we can imagine if we haven't built these paths of responsible tech and ethical tech on the way through. So Toby's actually as dark as they come, but he's also as experienced and in this field as it comes. So that's the thing that catches my attention, is the really big respected thinkers all are pretty dark. It's a great question. Thanks, Peter.
And Hugo Richard, you have a question. You're on mute.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much. That's great. I'd like you to, if you can, so I'm quite familiar with XAI, and I know it's really early stage for XAI in regards to what's happening around. So I was wondering if you could maybe share some of the framework that you use. So I'm familiar with LRP, but is there any other framework that you use for XAI in your experience?
What do you mean by that?
As in, what sort of, is there any framework or technique that you use to, make your AI explainable in some way?
There will be. I think we were very early out of the gates with explainable AI, so we just built it in a way that it was just easily exposed to data scientists or non-data scientists. But let me get back to you on that, Hugo. We didn't use the framework because it was before the day there was frameworks, but there definitely will be frameworks available now for sure. So that's a great thing, and a great thing for you guys to have in your toolkit. Yeah.
Okay, one last one for this part of the talk. I presume you've got a little bit more to pass across to us, Kat.
Yeah, just wrap up, really.
Okay, this is a question from Elaine Zelka.
Hi, thanks, Duncan. Hi, Kat. I work around the life science sector, so medical devices and so on. And we're seeing a huge amount of AI coming in. And in fact, your description of looking behind, looking deep into what they're actually doing is really very relevant. It's a major problem. There is increasing regulatory oversight by the FDA, by the TGA, and various other bodies that are looking at where these devices are interacting with humans, with human health.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether anyone's looking at it from an ethical perspective. That's one aspect. But is there some learning from that to the rest of the world? I don't know where it might go. So I'm kind of it's a very open question. I can't formulate it any more directly.
It's a great question, and it's probably the most important question, Elaine, as far as if we don't get it right in life sciences and health and med tech, then it's all going to go very horribly wrong. Look, a way of framing that. So you're all familiar with Forbes magazine. Forbes has a not-for-profit arm called Forbes Ignite, and I sit on their advisory board. And we are funding 6 major projects across the world in healthcare AI. And it's all women, actually, who are involved. There are 30 fellows who are in this team. But when I got to them to become their advisor, and I said, okay, so who's doing ethical AI, responsible AI? And they went, oh, shit, we didn't think about that. And I went, oh, okay, lucky I'm here. So that's, American, Forbes, very high profile, massive projects, massive funding, still without that being top of mind for them. So I am concerned that still healthcare and life sciences don't have this top of mind at all, and certainly don't have it here in Australia. So anything you can do, Elaine, to champion that. And what I say to most of my business audience is, look, we're not seeing this leadership come from government or tech giants or even your own leadership, because the higher up I go in companies, the less people know about AI. Certainly the boards know the least. So it has to be us. It has to be the employees. It has to be the investors. And I think you guys, or we as investors, have a lot of power in this, because these companies that are building AI want to be funded. But if you can start asking them these questions, then you start to really fund the ones that actually have got their heads in the right place around this, which again, ultimately, as I said before, should be a good investment decision, because one day the legislation and regulation will come in. Also, procurement in these enterprises who are buying AI are starting to look at putting in place ethical principles for their procurement. So if these companies don't have any ethical standards, they won't even get to sell their product.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Over to you, Kat.
Okay, awesome, thanks. Look, I have shared most of that with you with the view to really saying that as investors, I would thoroughly encourage you to think about these ethical principles. And again, I'll send some material out around that. And then when you are looking to invest, have as part of your protocol or your due diligence these ethical principles. And then if the company is still, a super hot, great company, you want to invest in them, and they've got no idea about this, which will actually be the majority of them, then there are certainly ways that we can help support them in training them to code ethically, or put the organizational behavior principles around them. So that there's certainly resources to do that. And what we're hoping is that Australia might be able to get a jump up on this, because Americans are hopeless at it, that we could actually carve out a really strong reputation globally about being the country that really took these ethical principles seriously in our AI. And again, I say, all of you who are investing and looking to invest in AI have a lot of influence and power to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Kat, if you could email me the presentation that you were planning on today, I'll make sure that everyone that attended this meeting gets a copy of that presentation. Does that presentation cover off on the 8 principles? Says he holding up 10 fingers. the 8 principles. Yeah. Keep
exactly.
the thumbs down.
It does.
They're all in that presentation?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, good, good. That was really, really, you're right. I first saw that comment about if it's free, if the product's free, you're not the customer, you are the product. I saw that years ago and it just really resonates with me. But I like the idea of the subscription, moving them across to a subscription model to hopefully get away from that. Melissa, did you have a question?
I sure do, thank you. Hi, Kat. Question about customers. So we've talked about the impact of investors making choices based on whether or not the company has a AI that is ethical. And what are you've given a few examples, the Wozniak example, things like that. At a macro level, what are you thinking are the risks for or opportunities for companies that are making sure their AI is ethical with a customer lens on?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think one, there's always the risk side of it, which is that if the company is dealing with their customers using ethical AI, there's much less chance that things are going to go wrong and they're not going to be on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age or dealing with lawsuits. So there's that. And that's traditionally where ethics is sat, unfortunately, in risk. But what I would like to think is that for those companies that have done ethical AI, customers, particularly the younger customers, so the Gen Z, the millennials, the Gen X, they will be looking for companies that are ethically focused and have an ethical brand. So I would predict that they will much more likely want to deal with companies that are ethical brand and have ethical AI and promote that. So I think that would be good from a customer and potential revenue lens. And then very interesting, the Sydney Ethics Centre about 6 months ago released a paper where they, I think that they had Deloitte do it, where they mapped what if Australia lifted its ethical infrastructure, so that's beyond technology, it's into everything, by just 10%. It was just 10% more ethical. And it returned something like $46 billion to the economy. So we're not far away from making very strong correlations between ethical infrastructure, ethical technology, and profit. And once we can do that, once we're further enough down, then the whole discussion changes. But Melissa, it's a great, I always think through the customer lens, it's where we have to think, and actually ultimately that's the most important. How the customers are affected by this technology is the most important. Thank you, great question.
Steve Barnes, you have a question.
Yeah, I guess my question is the macro level question. You started out earlier on saying, in essence, 40% of the whole swag of jobs will be done by machines, by computers. So there's probably the ethical question around that and the economic impact of that. Have you thoughts, insights on what that's going to mean and how we're going to deal with it?
Yeah, beautiful question, Stephen. I'm really pleased that you raised that. Okay, so here's how it is looking. If we look at Gartner, the analyst, predicts in the next 12 months, 1.8 million jobs in those sectors globally will be removed because AI will be doing those jobs. But at the same time, 2.3 million jobs will be created around the AI field. So 1.8, 2.3. So the net exchange of that is a 1.3 growth in jobs, which you might think is pretty good. However, won't be the 1.8 million who lose their jobs going into the 2.3 jobs that are created. And the most difficult part of this is 90% of the 1.8 million jobs that are being removed will be the jobs of women and minority groups, and will be the entry-level jobs that youth would normally take and already have a very high unemployment rate. So what it'll be is youth, women and minority groups will be the ones that are dislocated. And who do we hire into these big jobs? Well, at the moment, 9 in 10 artificial intelligence related jobs are held by men, 1 in 10 are held by women. So on a whole other level, Stephen, your description is perfect, macro level, we're dealing with all sorts of societal problems if this isn't done well.
And Hugo, another question.
Yes, sorry, second one. I guess this question is coming from the perspective of an entrepreneur, but I think it will also be relevant for investor. So you've mentioned some great things about building the algorithm itself in an ethical way. However, there's also the use of that the algorithm. To give you some context, we have an algorithm that can diagnose dyslexia by analyzing your voice.
Yeah.
And there is, for us, through the journey, there is the unknown of, we believe that we will help children, and suddenly you have a bank sending you an email saying, hey, you know, maybe we could use this to check, and you know, there could be some very negative use of this, saying if you're dyslexic, you pay more for your mortgage. So my question to you is, from an investor perspective as well, there is the exit. So the AI might be built properly and ethically, but a big organization can come and say, hey, we want to acquire your company. The use of the technology might change. And so I'd like your view on this in terms of you know, acquisition and potential misuse of that technology as well.
Yeah, well, it's very possible that would happen, Hugo, and that's just a great example. And we're seeing a lot of AI in insurance where whether it's telematic devices, so data off your personal devices going to the insurers, and the insurers making a decision not to insure you. You know, all of this is being discussed now. Look, there's no simple way through it. And would you as investors not support an exit if it was, you know, a massive multiple going for a bank using your dyslexia product and then excluding dyslexic people out of bank loans? It's a conundrum. I don't have an answer for that, but it's fantastic that we just raise these questions now, right? Raise these questions. How would we think about that, and how would investors think about that? I would like to think, I'm seeing so much good impact investment and ethical investment coming in, and particularly at Artesian, we have a very strong mandate around ethical investment, that type of scenario can also be brought in where investors would be willing not to take a big multiple in order for there not to be further, you know, damage and discrimination done. I would love to see we get to that at some stage, Hugo. Great question. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
I think on behalf of everybody, can I thank you, Kat, for sharing your incredible insights, and they really are thought-provoking, because I think, you know, the general population, if you think of by general population, this is what, you know, I've seen robo-debt. Now maybe it's too good a thing to actually describe what happened with the robo-debt debacle as AI. It probably isn't, but and then you get movies like, you know, Blade Runner with Skynet, which is, you know, a bit leaning on the dystopian side of things, but maybe that's what will happen if we don't put these you know, 8 principles into AI from day one. And I think it's a really good thing for all of us to think about. But thank you very, very much, and I look forward to receiving the presentation and make sure that everybody on this meeting gets a copy of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, such a pleasure. Thanks, guys. And look, again, anyone interested in talking to us at Artesian about the AI fund, please maybe go through Duncan, and or I'll put my details on the actual deck, and we'll have to speak to you. Awesome.
And I hope the weather's better in Melbourne on Monday when you're down here with the minister.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Okay. Safe travels.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you, Catriona.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.